Our collections and exhibitions team care for a huge collection of over 100,000 museum objects and over 1,700 artworks. We are so fortunate to have such a diverse range of objects, but the differing materials make the collection more challenging to care for. And there are things we have to consider to ensure they are preserved for future generations to enjoy and learn from. This applies when our collections are in store, during transportation, and importantly, whilst on display. Documentation is very important, so we know where our objects are at all times, and our records are kept up to date too. It's easy to locate something when it's really big, but when it's small, it can be a lot more difficult. We have to think about how our objects look when they are on display so that it can be viewed easily and by different people. And we have to ensure it's safe too, and it doesn't move around. This is especially important when we move anything. We undertake regular monitoring for pests that might be harmful, and we check our organic materials more often, as these are more susceptible to damage. We identify changes and we freeze our objects if needed to minimise the risks they pose to other collection objects. We also check our environment to ensure light, temperature and humidity levels are stable, as the wrong conditions can cause damaging effects. We can't always use the actual objects as they are too fragile, but we can 3D scan and print them, and then we can use them. The beauty of this is that we can change the size and material to suit what we are using them for. We also use 3D scans to monitor the condition of our objects. Some of the artwork we have you'd expect to see, but some are not. Looking after materials that are not traditional takes a lot more thought, but mostly we have robust methods in place to ensure that they are looked after properly. Sometimes it's not the artist's intention that the works will last forever. Some works are not made to last, and the idea might be that it doesn't make it into the future. This is something that museums are thinking about as artists use more unconventional materials in their work.
Our collection is full of surprises. Some of them are a bit nastier than others, and we need to deal with them differently depending on what material we are dealing with. Here we've got an asbestos fibre sample which would have been used in cotton mills and factories. But to care for this object, we need to make sure that it is contained. It's naturally contained how it comes because it comes in a box, but we'll put further precautions on this and bag it as well, so that if the box was to become loose or break down over time or degrade, it would still be contained. So a hazard you may not expect is radiation. And here we've got some glasses which would have been coated in a radioactive material. It could have been uranium or radium as well. And this was to sort of show off. People liked the sort of fluorescent glow that that material gave the glasses. So it was a bit of a status thing, and it helped people sort of show off that they've got glow-in-the-dark glasses. Another hazard that we've got in the collection, which was a bit of a surprise, are the top hats. Up until the early 1900s were made with mercury. PPE would be gloves and a mask as well. So to deal with this hazard is pretty straightforward because it doesn't pose a risk to us because we aren't inhaling it and it's secure in its object. It also comes in its own container, which is its original case. So there's not much need to do anything to this object. So I'm just going to pop it back. Top's back on, so it's safe, and now we can just pop it back away. Here we've got an example of a pretty mouldy object. It's a bit of a creepy chair. And when we do have mouldy objects that are quite large, we bring them in this room. So it's a contained room, which means that when we clean it and we brush up all of these mould spores, they're going to go into the air, but they aren't going to go and affect any of the other items in the collection because we're in here and we're in a secure environment. So how I'd start by cleaning this is with a hoover and a brush, and all we're going to do is brush off the mould spores and suck them up with the hoover. hope you've got a short insight into how we deal with hazards here. There's lots of different ways to manage them, and we've given a brief introduction into most of the ways.
Textiles are one of the more challenging areas to work with in the collection. They come with their own set of hazards, one of which is arsenic. Emerald green became very fashionable in the Victorian era after they invented a dye using arsenic to create this vibrant colour. And although they knew quite early on that it was very dangerous, they continued using it right up into the 1870s. When we're dealing with any costume from this period, we'd always make sure we were wearing protective gloves. We don't want to be touching this directly. Another thing we've got to be really aware of when working with costume is any hazards that might cause damage to the collection itself. Costume, we're really concerned about any moth infestations we might get. Textiles that are organic, such as wool and cotton, as you can see in this dress, fortunately it has had some moth activity at some point in its life. So to protect the textiles from moths, we are constantly monitoring and are on the lookout for any sign of moth. We use sticky traps and pheromone traps to give us a good idea of what's going on in the store. We also need to ensure that textile objects are safely packed so that they don't come to any harm or deteriorate while they're in storage. Large textiles will be stored rolled with protective material, and for the costume we have specially made costume boxes. It's really important that the packing materials that we use are acid-free, such as this acid-free tissue paper. And it's also important that we change the tissue paper regularly, as over time it will absorb acid from the clothing and become acidic. We don't want to have any harsh creases in the fabric as we're packing, so we'll use things like a tissue sausage or a tissue cloud to protect and support the clothing whilst it's packed. An important part of working with collections is preparing them for display. With costume display, if the garments are in good enough condition, they're often mounted onto mannequins. Shaping the mannequins so the costumes are both fully supported and look good for the audience can be a lengthy process. Here we are preparing to mount this nylon lace dress from the 1950s, ready to be displayed in an exhibition.
Art loans offer a wonderful way to show our collections in new ways and work with new partners and curators. As a museum and art gallery service, it's not unusual for artworks, archive files and objects to be coming and going most of the time, moving from one internal location to another or externally going on loan. Our resource centre can be a very transient space. Loaning artworks to other museums and galleries, both nationally and internationally, helps share our collections to new and wider audiences and also brings in revenue. Loaning artworks helps stimulate research and often gives artworks a chance to be conserved. Our art stores are far from static and at any one time have about 15 works out on loan to other institutions. Our art gallery coordinator works to organise these processes in contact with curators, registrars, lenders, conservators and transport agents. Our art loans can be seen in Rochdale with works at the Town Hall, as well as works regularly being loaned to Tate and other regional and national museums and galleries. Our collections have also been around the world, for example to France, Italy, Japan and Korea. Before an artwork is transported, it is properly condition checked and packed. Sometimes, particularly easel paintings, are packed in a specially made case to help maintain steady environmental conditions. Art handlers and technicians will also work to make sure that routes are planned and that all aspects of movement are carefully considered. Once the loaned artwork comes back, we often receive a catalogue from the exhibition that the artwork has been part of, which is a great record for the painting's history.
So one of the most common questions we get asked by visitors is, how do we decide what to collect? In the past, decisions around what we collect were made by the curators at Touchstones. However, today we have a collections development panel who meet to discuss donations and acquisition offers. The panel's made up of staff from Touchstones as well as people from the local community who want a say in how local heritage is collected. The process is more collaborative and transparent, and it's the right approach for Touchstones, where we have a strong focus on co-production and partnerships with the local community. Since we invited people from the community to join the collections development panel, one of the most exciting items has been the Roman coin hoard, which was found by detectorists in Littleborough. It's a really good creative learning resource. The team have been using it to teach about Romans from a local perspective. Our more contemporary objects have been a set of bangles which were donated to us. They're not necessarily very valuable, but they tell a really important story about the donor and her experience of domestic violence and abuse. Alongside the bangles, we were able to collect her oral history and really connects them to a person in the borough. We collect because we have a direct relationship with Rochdale's history and the people and communities that live here. So whilst we continue to collect historical items, we also now collect contemporary items so that generations in the future can look back at this particular period in Rochdale's history and understand who the communities and the people were that live here.
Painted in 1894, this artwork is the second oldest artwork by a female artist in the collection and has been on a journey of preservation and contextual research, adding to its provenance and confirming its artist attribution. Kate A. Simpson's portrait of her sister Eva Florence, has now been conserved. Before and after pictures show the paint surface and canvas in a much healthier condition after years of being unframed and deemed not display-worthy. The painting required surface cleaning and old varnish removal. Some areas of the paint surface were consolidated, particularly fragile paint, around punctures and scratches. Tears were mended before a final varnished layer, minimal retouching and filling with powdered pigments to regenerate areas of loss and abrasion. Research on the artwork was conducted last year on the back of an inquiry from a research curator working with Art UK's Art Detective project. This offered knowledge about the artist and her family. We were able to confirm that the artist was Kate Simpson, also known as Catherine Ashton Simpson and Catherine Pierce Ellis. They were the same person, the same wife and the same artist. This has also confirmed her status as a benefactor, donating a unique tea service, amongst other objects, to our museum in 1936. Being a female artist painting in the late part of the 19th century, it wasn't unusual for records to be lost due to name changes after marriage, or for just initials to be used, even for a husband or male family member to be recorded in place of hers. The artwork was originally attributed to her brother. We now know so much more about her practice and her local roots.
Not all art histories live in the nation's capital. Some are buried right where we stand. This archive contains thousands of materials telling stories about art, about ourselves, about Rochdale and the world. Inside are moments of protests for equal pay, community organising and the voices of artists and art workers who shaped Touchstones. We're digitising this archive and improving its storage, preserving the bold curatorial and creative practices of the 1980s and 90s. This project sits at the heart of who we are as a cultural organisation and how we work with artists and communities. The archive includes photographic slides of how our gallery spaces once looked and the beautiful exhibition posters that will cover our staircase. This project grew from our 2023 exhibition A Tall Order, part of a Paul Mellon Centre funded research project with additional funding through Arts Council and our Friends group. And it explores how Rochdale Art Gallery supported artists early in their career during a time of great political and social change. The work links the gallery's radical past with today's debates on identity, representation, curating and art. that influence is still felt. We're receiving renewed interest in artists, some who are no longer with us, making this work even more important. By digitising the archive, we're not just preserving the past, we're keeping these artists' influences alive. As part of this project, University of Manchester students and a Rochdale-based artist have joined us to help digitise the archive. They've brought fresh perspectives that will ensure its stories can be explored in new ways for years to come.
Touchstones is always looking for ways to engage community groups with the collection, and one of the projects we're working on at the moment is the redesign of the garden with a charity called Petrus. They are working to end homelessness. One of the collection stories that we've been uncovering for this project is of a woman called Ellen Wallace, whose nickname was Nell Racker. She was a healer, she used herbs from all around the Rochdale area. She lived on Belfield Road. And we'll look at some plants that would have been in Ellen's garden and will now be in ours. This is lungwort, which would have had many uses and still has many uses, particularly like kidney and urinary tract diseases. This is plantain, used for a variety of reasons, which will also feature in the garden. This is the area that we're going to dedicate to the story of Ellen Wallace and biodiversity. We're going to have some beds here, so people are going to be able to see it from the outside space and from in the garden. These are going to showcase plants that she would have had in her garden and plants that are used for medicinal purposes today. Things like yarrow, nettle, mugwort, lungwort, valerian. Ellen Wallace's story is all about putting health in the hands of the people, having that knowledge and those resources which was growing all around Rochdale and Blackstone Edge to be able to help people treat themselves. The co-production element brings that knowledge back in terms of people using their own hands to be able to grow things that they have access to and that they can use themselves.
Collections on Tour was developed from a need to make our collections more accessible to audiences, particularly whilst the Touchstones building is closed for redevelopment. It started out as a mini museum to showcase all the different collections we look after. Archaeology, art, social history, costume and natural history were all included. Something we could take out to different events in the boroughs and show to different audiences. The more events we do, the more the mini museum has developed. We've changed the objects to reflect specific themes for certain events. This means that our audiences always have something new to look at. Our technician Paul made some lovely wooden crates that could safely store and transport the collections to events. This made balancing care for the collections with taking them out to events much easier, as we knew everything was safe and easy to display. The lovely design of the crates also meant they could be used in the display to make the objects really stand out and promote the Collections on Tour brand. Rick, our digital technician, also 3D prints objects from the mini museum so that people can see the real thing and then handle the printed object. This has been a big hit with kids. They loved the megalodon tooth and it gave them the opportunity to handle something that otherwise is too fragile for them to touch. Collections on Tour has given us a really good opportunity to engage people with the collections who might not necessarily visit museums. It's given us the opportunity to promote the reopening of Touchstones. It's also given us a great opportunity to collaborate with our learning team to develop creative, fun activities that are inspired by the collections.